Chapter 91, Heather POV. The sun rose in the sky, and Mom woke up. She managed to get about 3 hours sleep. She went to the bathroom and freshened up, then returned to give me a kiss on the cheek and check on Mason. He still showed no signs of waking up, but he had stopped changing. I found it frustrating that I could not feel his emotions or him. He was a part of me for such a brief time, but when he fell asleep and started transforming, all my ties to him were blocked. Somehow I knew they weren't broken, just blocked. Maybe this testing could be hard on me, or maybe it blocks me so I can't influence the outcome. Either way, it was annoying. Mom opened the door to a maid, who wheeled in a trolley full of food, and another followed her, and in those arms were full of clothes, new clothes for Mason. They both gasped at seeing me in the room, and then stared at the prone man lying on the bed. I'm not sure what the castle gossip was at the moment, but these maids would start a whole new lot of chatter when they left. I guess the king had not told the castle of my return or of Mason's state. They turned to leave in a hurry, whispering to each other as they went. And just as they reached the door, they remembered their manners and quickly turned back to me and bowed, then rushed out the door, closing it softly behind me before I could say anything. Which I guess is a good thing. I'm not sure I wanted to say anything. And they could make up a better story about Mason being asleep in bed than I could ever dream of. Food? Mom asked. I knew what she meant, but I think I must be in one of those moods. Smells like it, I replied with a grin. Mom's face whipped up to stare at me in shock, then burst into giggles, and the room's atmosphere instantly changed. Well, if you can smell it, tell me what is on the trolley. Mom lifted a lid to one of the plates. Bacon, eggs, tomatoes, mushroom, toast, coffee. Oh, yes, please, coffee, I said as I rushed over to the trolley, and Mom, who had poured out 2 cups of coffee. Can you eat? She asked, placing some toast, bacon, tomatoes, and mushrooms on a plate, knowing I dislike eggs. Thanks, I replied, and started to set up the table with cutlery. Hey, what about me? I'm hungry. The groggy voice of Mason broke my table setting. I dropped the cutlery and rushed over to my mate, who was sitting on the bed, naked, and I threw my arms around him, giving him a long kiss, which he returned with gusto. Get a room, Mom shouted at us, then chuckled at the comment. I broke the kiss and looked at her. Mom, is this not a room? I looked at her as if confused, and more chuckles filled the room, and Mason's booming laughter joined us, and I almost swooned at how deep and husky his voice was now. Mom, you finish setting up the food. I'll get Mason some clothes, I suggested, and headed over to where the maids had placed the clothes, sorting through them and grabbing a track pants and a shirt and boxers, and giving them to Mason. He stood up and started to dress, right there by the bed. My mother chuckled again and turned her back and continued to be busy. Mason then went to the now set table and grabbed one of the coffees, downing it in one long swallow. I guess he was thirsty. He then sat at the bed and looked at us expectantly. How are you feeling, son? Mom asked, as she took a seat, and I watched Mason as I also sat down. Energized. I'm impressed with the transformation. I look good, he said matter-of-factly, and dug into the food. He looked hungry. Mom poured him another coffee, and we sat down to eat happily, when there was a knock at the door. I got up to answer it as I was closest to the door. When I saw it was the king, I opened the door further and motioned for him to enter. He took one look at Mason eating and rushed into the room excitedly. Son, you are awake, Zoran said, and both Mom and I burst into giggles. Today was a day to state the obvious, and I knew exactly what Mom was thinking. This got both Zoran and Mason staring at Mom and me as I walked back to the table after closing the door, giggling all the way. Mason nodded to his dad as he shoveled more food into his mouth. Zoran sat down and joined us for breakfast. I saw Mom's eyes glaze over and knew she must have informed Dad of Mason's completed transformation, and I smiled. At that, I got my mate back, and I was wondering what was in store for us now. Brenda had not even hinted at what our transformation could mean, just that it had to happen before the Lycans could force what they wanted onto us. Zoran informed Mason of the security changes and of the impending arrival of the Lycans. I had no idea when, just that now that they had found me, they would not leave me in peace. The chatter was comfortable, none of us asking Mason what went on when he was transforming. I had not shared that he had to go through a test, just that he might not survive the transformation. So far, Mason had kept his mind blocked from me, so I could not see what happened. Maybe he was waiting for us to be alone for him to share it? Alice came rushing to the door, not bothering to knock, and hugged Mason from behind, then pulled the desk chair over, and we all squeezed together so she could join us for breakfast. Wow, this room suddenly felt crowded, and I felt the need to push them all out. This was not my feeling. I looked up at Mason and saw him close his eyes and take a deep breath. Alice, Zoran, thank you for joining us for breakfast. I think Mason would like to take a shower now and get freshened up after his ordeal, I suggested. They both looked at Mason and could clearly see he was struggling with something. They nodded at me and got up. Catch you shortly, son, Zoran said, and walked with Alice out the door. I better get back to the twins. I'm sure your father would like a break. Mom gave Mason a kiss on the cheek, then me, then left the room. Thanks, Mason murmured, and got up and went to the bathroom. I'm not sure what was going on with him, but I felt he needed this time alone. So I sat there and drank my coffee as I waited for Mason to get it together and come and explain what was on his mind.
Mason, POV. The smell of bacon woke me from the strangest dream I had been having. Some woman named Brenda was giving me all sorts of training and instructions, and Brenda was glowing with pride at how well I had adapted to my new body. Weird, right? I loved the pleased look on my mate's face when she heard my voice. It was deeper after the transformation, and she rushed over to give me a kiss, and boy did I need that kiss. The clothes she gave me fitted nicely, and I was glad she had thought of getting me some that would fit. I certainly won't be fitting my old ones. My stomach reminded me why I woke up, and I thought I would shower after I filled my belly. There was so much I wanted to share with Heather. Heather was watching me closely, and I understood I had changed a lot, and I guess only time would tell how my mind had accepted the changes. I was still emotional from the testing and the thought of losing Heather. I swallowed the first coffee and it hardly touched the sides, and then I sat at the table. Well, sort of, though our tables and chairs are larger and stronger than most because werewolves tended to be taller and bigger. I still barely fit on the chair, and I wondered if it would hold my weight. My legs had the same problems. I could not sit comfortably at what seemed to be a small table and dug into the food like a starving man, and that was how I felt. Very hungry. I had to be careful not to be greedy and eat the lot. We were having a nice threesome breakfast. Then Dad arrived, and that was okay. He was filling me in with what had happened since we chatted last, and what was going on now that Heather had returned. And yeah, a lot has happened, security-wise. We thought we were good with our security. Heather had shown us how stupid we were when going clubbing and letting girls jump at us, and then the poisoning and now the kidnapping. We had to look at all our procedures again and whether my brothers liked it or not. The security would have to tighten, and I felt the need to protect my mate even stronger now, that we had done the deed. Mother then walked into the room, with her head held high, as if she was entitled to just walk in without even knocking. And that pissed me off. I was surprised how quickly my temper rose, and I was having trouble keeping it under control. I wanted to spend time with my mate and not all these people. I had more or less got mated and fell asleep. I needed to hold her and maybe do a little more than that, but I have to listen to my mother's voice, and it was grating on me. Yeah, Mum means well, but she had got used to getting everything she wants, and not thinking before jumping in, and right now, just making us squeeze closer together when I'm still getting used to being another foot taller and wider. I felt closed in and fighting the need to burst out in anger. Heather picked up on my unease, even though I was blocking her at the moment, and I was surprised she still managed to pick up some of how I felt.
Zoran, Alice, can you give us a little time? Mason had only just woken up and had yet to have a shower. Could you please leave and I will contact you when he is ready to sit and talk? All this may be a little overwhelming. I know it shocked me to wake up and be a lot taller and completely different in looks.
She had then so politely kicked them all out. Even her own mother left, giving Heather a quick kiss on the cheek and whispered something in her ear. Heather nodded to her and followed the people to the door and closed it behind them. And I heard the click of the lock, and that sound seemed to calm me right down. I wolfed down the rest of the food that was still on the table, eating more than double the amount I would normally eat, and I still felt I could eat all that again. I looked guiltily at Heather, having not shared the food, but she just giggled at me and pushed me towards the bathroom door and the waiting shower. The shower water was turned to the hottest it could go, and after some adjusting to the height of the nozzle of the shower jets, being taller, I had to bend my head to fit under it. It was too low. I must see if I could get some sort of extension to the pipe and get it raised a bit higher. I managed to calm down and get ready to chat to Heather. She deserved to have this block unblocked, but I did not want her to see what I went through in front of the others. It was private, and I would only share this with her. I dried off as I thought of the best way to approach this, and wondered if unblocking her would be the best. I hardly got out of the bathroom door and Heather was on me, kissing me like a hungry demon. Her needs were close to what mine were, the need to touch and feel and be with my mate. I realized it was my wolf that had taken over. Without me realizing it, I had shifted into my wolf and the two lichens were bonding and mating. I was kind of shocked at first that I had not felt the shift to wolf, but I left them to do what they needed to do and rested back as a sort of passenger. Boy, these two could go at it with some vigor, and I was in awe at how my lichen could be so gentle with his mate at first, letting Heather's wolf, Sky, take the lead. And then something snapped, and the gentle, caring Ezra turned into a rough, needy wolf, and their build to climax was intense. I was exhausted by the time these two had finished, and proud, too, at the stamina my wolf had, and Sky, too, for that matter. What happened after they finished mating, I was not sure. I woke up on the floor, cuddling Heather close to me, and my wolf was purring softly inside my head, like a contented cat. Talk about confusion. I hate cats, though I did not mind waking up with Heather in my arms.
Chapter 93. Heather, POV. Clearing the table of the dirty dishes and placing the trolley outside our door, I made doubly sure that I locked the door again. I could feel Mason when his mother walked in. He was barely holding it together with his dad. His mom took him to his limit. It wasn't really his mom or dad's fault. They wanted to see their son was awake and well. My mom had stayed in the background. She helped to set the table with food and stuff like that. So Mason didn't give my mom a second thought as an intruder. His dad was another thing. He tolerated it because he wanted the information, though I think his dad could have waited to give him time to eat and shower. His mother was a different story. She came in without knocking and then started with the, "How are you? How do you feel? What happened when you were out like a light?" and poor Mason did not have the time to answer one question when she was already firing another. The only thing I could do was shoo them out the door, and my mom had to go too, or it would have looked odd sending only one out the door. When Mason came out of the bathroom naked, my wolf Sky took over, and I let her. I knew she needed time with Ezra and bond. Once that was done, our whole mating ritual would be done and dusted, and it had to happen before the Lycans came back, hunting for me. And they would be disappointed. Ezra was being gentle, giving Sky time to adjust to Ezra and his massive size. Don't get me wrong, Sky was almost double the size of a pack wolf, but Ezra was another size again, too. Together, we were a normal size together, meaning I was the size that I should be for the massive Ezra that he was now. He stood a little taller than a large horse, and I was up to his shoulders. We were perfect together. I was pure white, and so was he. It was rare for a male to be pure white, and I was eager to find out why that was. I have no clue why I expected him to be black. I fell asleep after Sky wore me out after her romp with Ezra. They certainly have stamina. Sky told me the bonding was now complete before she fell asleep, and I wondered what that meant. I had to open the influx of information I gained when I mated with Mason, but I wanted to do it with Mason so we could understand together and could ask each other questions about what I had learned and how we may see things slightly differently. I stretched out my body and felt Mason pull me closer to him, and I felt safe and secure in his arms. But I knew I could not stay like this all day. "Mason?" I whispered as I turned around in his arms to look at his face. I peppered his face and cheeks with soft kisses until his eyes opened up to look at me. He pulled me closer to him and captured my lips for a deep kiss. "Mason," I managed to say as I pulled back begrudgingly. "What?" he whispered back as he licked and kissed my mark on my neck, making me squirm. "We have to get up and talk. We have a lot to get through before the Lycans come looking for us." I pushed at him and smiled at his growl of annoyance. "I like where we are. I had no idea that carpet was so comfortable," he grumbled, trying to pull me back to him to snuggle a little longer, or to do other things. I wasn't against the idea. "Sweetheart, I need us to look at the information we've received. We need to understand what's going on and what could happen. Please?" I begged. Mason grumbled something unintelligible and sighed, sitting up and pulling me with him. He kissed my neck and took another deep breath, taking in my scent before releasing me and standing up, leaving me sitting on the floor, getting an eye view of his erection that he was hoping to use. It was a grand sight to see. He grew not just in his height, and I was looking forward to using that magnificent specimen. Mason looked down at me and smirked, knowing what was going on in my mind, and wiggled his hips, making the member bounce. And I licked my lips before lifting my head up to look at him and smiled back, knowing he was going to be disappointed by not getting to use it right now. I raised my hand to him and he took it, and with strength I thought he had not yet gotten used to, pulled me to my feet and into his arms. Or maybe he knew he would have me in his arms and did it to shock me. I giggled and kissed his mark and pushed him back. "I think we need a shower before we get dressed. The dogs had a rather long session, and I'm a little gross at the moment," I said, and headed to the bathroom, wiggling my butt as I passed by him. He reached out and grabbed me, lifting me up into his arms and carrying me to the shower. I guess he was going to use that impressive shaft after all. He did all the work, turning on the water and taking me under the spray of water, never letting me go. He kissed and sucked and nipped his way around my neck and throat, and to my breasts. He found a ticklish spot and worked on that for a little while, until I was groaning with frustration. Slowly, he lifted me up, and I watched the ceiling come closer to me. Luckily, we had high ceilings in the castle, and he lowered me onto his shaft, impaling me with a sudden thrust. He pushed me against the shower wall and started to move in and out of me, the friction hitting all the right spots. My body was quick to rise to the need. We thrust and groaned and wiggled and bit each other until I screamed his name and he exploded his load into me. He held onto me with his 2 strong arms as my body went weak like a newborn puppy. All too soon, as we had finished our shower and were back in our room, we decided to sit on the floor. Once we were dressed and held each other's hands as we opened our minds together and looked into that information that had flooded into our minds when we first mated. Talk about information overload. Mason groaned and withdrew one of his hands and rubbed his forehead. The digestion of this information was going to take a little while. I called Sky forward and asked what she knew, and she just huffed at me, as if I should have already known the answer to that question, and refused to talk about it. Lost with no other choice, slowly, I had to wade through it myself. I closed my eyes, and slowly the information that was trying to fill my conscious mind brought it to a more acceptable level of receiving it. Once I managed to do that, the rest was easier, as I already had some of this knowledge. I was getting more comfortable as I received the information. I loved going to the library and reading books, so this was not too much different. And soon I found I could ask a question and have the answer appear. Now this is more like it.
Mason, POV. Waking up to lots of kisses from my mate had me hard in an instant. This was more like it, my mate in my arms. I had waited too long for this. And then she said we had to talk, and it seemed I was not going to mate with her now. I felt a little disappointed. When I stood up, I could smell her arousal as she stared at my erection and licked her lips. She wanted it as badly as I did. Well, shower, here we come. Picking her up and taking her to the shower with very little resistance, and entering her and filling her with my seed was also accepted, so I was on cloud 9 and loving being mated. We sat and the information was too much. My head wanted to explode, and then I felt Heather in my head and sorting the information out of me, putting it in some sort of order, and soon it was flowing at a speed I could handle, and things were making more sense. There is a lot of Lycan history here, as well as abilities I should have, as well as Heather, though I knew she had some great abilities already. But this is insane. One particular piece of information that stood out and shocked me was that Heather and I were now the new king and queen of the Lycan people. I was not sure how that worked, and would need to talk to Heather about that, as it did not make sense. Did they not already have a queen? I am no king, though Heather would make a good queen. I had said that once before. Oh shit, she is a queen, and I happen to be her mate. Then I have to be the king. No, I won't believe that until I see it with my own eyes. She could be the queen and I will be the queen's consort. Yeah, that sounds better. I can be the consort, so I don't have to worry about running a pack. That is why I am the second born. I was to be a beta, not a king. Heather's lips grazed mine, and I opened my eyes to look at her and saw Sky's eyes looking back at me. And I frowned. Before I could even think about what that meant, Ezra had taken over again. I did not feel him taking over, and this was starting to worry me. I should have some control over my Lycan taking over. Surely I do.
Don't worry, my love. All will settle as it should. We have to get used to each other first, and Ezra is a strong beast and can easily take control, but you will have the control at the important times. For now, we have to let our animals have more time.
I heard Heather's voice was in my head, talking to me as calm as could be, but was not at all shocked that Ezra had taken over, or that Sky and Ezra were having their own wolf conversations. I got bits and pieces of it, but for the larger part, I listened to Heather and stopped trying to take in what the wolves were talking about. Again, we were in the back seat as Ezra and Sky growled and howled at each other. I heard a knock at the door and was glad that Heather had locked it. Now was not the time for someone to come barging in.
"Who is it?"
I heard Heather call out, and I looked at her through Ezra's eyes and wondered how she could do that. I am barely about to make a grunting sound.
"We heard growling. Is everything all right in there?"
called Mum, and I should have known she would be hanging around, waiting to get in here and continue her little tirade she was doing earlier.
"We are fine. Thank you for asking, Alice. Our lichens are just getting to know one another and bonding. We did not think the Kingdom of Wolves were ready to see us out in the forest, so they have shifted in here and letting them get to know one another."
Heather was amazing. You would not have known that she was in her wolf. Sorry, no, that is not right anymore. In her lichen form. And she is beautiful. Although I am watching through Ezra's eyes and hearing through his ears, I can see, hear, and smell everything, and I can feel his love for Sky and Heather. It is getting stronger the longer he is in his form, and I think I am starting to understand what Heather was saying about letting them romp together for a little while. Because when we leave this room, they will have less time in this form until we get used to how our lives are changing.
"Okay, well, dinner is in an hour. Will you be coming down to eat?"
Mother was persistent. I gave her that. She looked at me and I nodded at her, happy to go downstairs and get this over and done with.
"We shall be down for dinner,"
Heather replied, and I heard Mother's footsteps leaving. Wow, I can't usually hear anything outside the door. It is supposed to be soundproof. This lichen hearing is better than my wolf hearing for me to hear that. This is scary stuff. These lichens are powerful.
Chapter 95. Heather POV. Seeing Mason come out of the bathroom in nothing but a towel, the sight of him before me, his hair still damp, his body so beautiful. I loved the changes that becoming a lichen had made to his body. It made me all warm inside, and soon Sky had taken over in the blink of an eye, and it was way too quick for me to stop her. She was on her mate before I had a chance to blink. Soon we were mating again, bonding greater than ever before, and I was enjoying resting and letting Sky have her way. I had lots on my mind and took this moment to think and try and clear my thoughts, allowing Sky to do what she needed to do. Mason was also in the back seat as well, and I could feel him wanting to get this over with and get back to talking. This has been a confusing few days, and I feel like this is just the tip of the mountain of changes that were about to happen in our lives. When the mating was over, I felt my body changing again, and looked at Mason to see the same thing was happening with him. We were growing again. Now that the lichen side of us had finished mating and completing their bond, we were one in more ways than before. While they were mating, I had heard and smelled Alice at the door, and agreed to come downstairs and join them for dinner. When they shifted back and let us take over control again, Sky moved to the back of my mind, and I felt her make little circles and lie down for some rest and sleep. Looking over at Mason, I felt shocked at the size he was now. And then I looked down and gasped. I was just over 7 feet tall, and Mason seemed around 8. We were both huge. I would have to make some adjustments to our clothing, and hopefully I could meet up with the dressmaker and get some larger clothes made. Both of us also had to go barefoot, as we had no footwear large enough to fit our large feet. I wondered how much larger our lichen wolf size would be if we gained some more size, not just in height, but in body in general. And something inside me told me that I had changed in another way that I had yet to discover and understand. I noticed Mason's eye color had changed. Looking in the mirror, mine had too. We looked nothing like we had only a few days ago. The people in the palace were going to be shocked. How did you talk with your voice when you were in wolf form? It was a little surprising to hear you like that, Mason asked as he finished making the adjustments to his pants. We had to wear track pants as nothing else would fit, and the length of them came to our calves. We both struggled not to laugh as we tried to squeeze into them. Get used to surprises. I feel like we have more in store for us. I felt like I was avoiding answering his questions. Saying anything out loud would make it all the more real. Having dressed as best I could and making the adjustments to the clothing for Mason, we left the room together. I was so glad this was an old castle and the ceilings and doors were high, or we would have had trouble moving around. We did not bother with the elevator, not sure if it would be high enough. It is a modern addition to the castle. It means the height may have been good when I first changed, but the second change, there was no way an 8-foot-tall man would fit in it. We walked down the stairs 3 at a time, and that even felt like too small a step. People gasped audibly when they saw us on the stairs. Together we walked into the dining hall, and all the chatter I could hear before we entered the room immediately ceased when we entered. All eyes were on us, and even the king and queen had their mouths gaping open. They had never seen anyone that tall before. We eclipsed those who kidnapped me in height and stature. Approaching the top table, I wondered if the chairs would be strong enough to take our weight. Don't worry, those chairs can support our new size. Mason mind-linked me, as if he could read my mind. And for a brief moment, I thought he might be able to. We had new abilities. He might just have that gift. I heard him chuckling beside me, but not elaborate on what was going on in his mind. We reached 2 empty chairs that were waiting for us. Mason pulled one out, being the very courteous man he was trying to be. I chuckled this time, and he looked at me with a smirk. Yep, we had reached a new level in our relationship, one that would not change until we died. It was not like I could get rid of him now. He was more a part of me than ever before. Werewolf mates were on a different sort of level of bond. This was life-changing, making the male feel the need to go all protective over his mate. But this lichen level brings the idea of soulmates or fated mates to a whole new level, and I was enjoying it very much. I could feel his every emotion and thought. It was like he was telling me what was going on in his head, a sort of running commentary. He was like having another Sky in my head, constantly telling me when I'm wrong or what she wants or arguing with me. Now I had 2 voices in my head. I managed to block Mason out, like I do when I put Sky out of my head, and made sure I was not sending him a running commentary. This is all so new and slightly confusing. I was hearing multiple voices. I wonder if he can hear Sky when she speaks to me. Now that would be embarrassing. She could be a dirty dog, when she has the mind to be. And it was not just his talking to me. He was inside of me, like we were one body. And our weird joined feelings. I'm out of words to explain how I am 2 people sharing one body, and I know he feels the same. I am inside of him as he is inside of me. Sweetheart, if the voices are too much for you, think of that little box we made for all the information. Place it in your head. Send all the talking there. Before I realized what I was doing, I made those little choices in his head. And it calmed all the many voices in mine. Mason sat beside me, and I looked around the room, seeing all of those eyes still on us. Mason grabbed my hand from under the table and gave it a squeeze. I gave a very small nod, accepting his comfort, and grabbed a plate of chicken pieces and placed them on my plate and then some on Mason's. That will not do, my sweet, Mason said, and grabbed the platter that had the chicken pieces and changed our plates to the platters that the food was on. He grabbed a few jugs, and they became our drinking vessels. He filled the platter with vegetables, and soon our plates were filled enough with food to fill 10 people, and I still wondered if it was going to be enough. I was starving, and I knew Mason was too. No one said a word about the changes Mason made, using jugs as glasses and platters as plates. They filled their own plates, and soon the chatter began to grow around the tables. I could hear most of the whispers were about Mason and me, and I knew there was little else either of us could do about it. What I was pleased about was my mom and dad being at the table. Mom got up and gave me a hug, the best she could, and kissed Mason on the cheek. Dad nodded his greeting from his chair, both very aware of how people would view us now. "Have you finished growing?" Alice asked, sounding a little worried. "I believe we have," I replied, hoping it was true. I did not feel the need to grow anymore, and I was way over the size of an average man, and poor Mason was gigantic. "Maybe the dressmakers can make you some clothing. That would, better fit for now. And later we can look at what would be better suited to a lady of your size. And what do we do about those feet?" Alice meant well, but her ability to articulate a clear sentence at the moment seemed to fail her. The shock was evident in her tone.
Mason, POV. Before we even reached the bottom of the stairs, I could hear all the voices. I tried to block them out but had difficulty. I could hear everyone's thoughts clearly, even Heather's, though she was more worried about entering the dining room and scaring everyone with our new size. And I could understand that we were large. Then when we entered the dining hall and the verbal voices stopped, the mental ones continued, and some were damn right rude. Heather giggled at me and then helped put the voices out of my mind. She must hear them like I do. So glad she understands what is happening, because I surely don't. Heather tried to make up a plate of food for us, but the portions were way too small, so I had to take over by grabbing a platter and jugs and using them like normal people use plates and glasses. This made Heather giggle again as I built a decent-sized meal for us both. The room had their eyes on us, and I knew we were most likely a big novelty for them at the moment. Hopefully that will not be for long. I'm sure they will find something else to gossip about soon enough. Heather's mum is a sweetheart, coming to give Heather a hug and me a kiss. She was showing those at the tables that we were still being us, and not violent, and so nothing to worry about. I do not feel anything negative from either of her parents, yet mine were worried about what all this meant and were concerned about how it would affect the kingdom and the people. Would they be concerned about their safety now that 2 very large lichens lived in the palace? Stupid, I know, but I'm sure we would happily move out if us being here was detrimental to the well-being of the kingdom. We may look large, but deep down I was sure we were a couple of softies that would not hurt anyone without provocation. The food went down well. Heather and I were starving after all the bedroom activity we had been having, and we were content to sit and watch the people around the room. They were now more comfortable with us being here. Others you could feel and smell the fear coming off of them. My lichen hearing and smell was so much greater than a wolf that I could hear staff down the hall whispering about us, and I was amazed by it. Heather showed no outward signs that this was upsetting her, but every now and then I could hear the quietest of growls escaping her lips as another bit of gossip reached her ears. Our parents were being very talkative. First it was our clothing and the need to get some decent clothes made before they could present us to the people, and when they should present us and how would they present us. Then it was about how to use our new abilities to the kingdom's betterment. And then our rooms would need refurbishing, as I had mentioned the shower was too small. The chatter went on and on, when all I wanted to do was go back to bed. I was feeling a little tired from all the negativity and the need to hold my mate. if for no other reason than to reassure myself that this was not a dream, and we are these two abominations, as some were calling us. Suddenly the alarms went off and everyone stood, staring at the doors, and soon Mum and Dad's security guards came running into the dining hall and surrounded Mum and Dad, prepared to protect them the best they could. Heather and myself stayed seated. I had felt no fear of an invasion. This was something else. But what, I could not even guess. Heather grabbed my hand from under the table and gave it a reassuring squeeze and waited for whoever was coming. "Son?" Dad queried, but Heather and I did not move or look in his direction. My head had turned to look at the door like everyone else in the room. This made Dad and Mum and Heather's parents sit back down, and we smelt the fear radiating off of those in the hall, and that included our parents, though not strong. I guess they had more control over their emotions than most in the hall. Why did Heather and I feel no fear? I could make lots of guesses. Once we were huge and large lichens, it would be hard to kill either of us. So maybe we were feeling invincible in our new bodies. Whatever the reason, we did not panic or show fear. I tried to act natural and grabbed the jug that was acting as my glass and took a large swallow of juice, and Heather did the same. She kept telling me all was okay and not to panic. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I trusted her. A group of very large lichen men walked into the room. They were all in some sort of formal warrior attire, and they were followed by a number of other elegantly dressed men and women. They stood in two lines, facing forward, and looked as if they were waiting for something. The people in the room stood quiet and still, not wanting to provoke the visitors, I guess. Heather was fine with all of this. She acted as if she was expecting it, and though I felt closer to her than ever before, she was still stronger than me and could control her emotions, blocking them from me, and I could not hear her thoughts, only words that she wished for me to hear. Soothing, comforting words. An old woman entered the room, a man beside her helping her along. They walked up between the lines of lichens and stopped before our table. The woman looked at me. She had a sparkle in her eyes and a knowing look that I could not interpret, and her mind was closed off so I could not hear her thoughts, and then she turned and looked over at Heather, and her face softened and a smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. The men and women who had arrived before the old woman, they all stood at attention and waited for a signal or something to happen. They made no sound. They had all turned their heads and watched the old woman as she walked down the middle of the hall between the tall, elegant lichens. The old woman then did something that shocked me. She slowly lowered herself down to the floor with the aid of the man beside her and knelt in front of Heather. Her head bowed as low as she could go without hitting the floor with her head, her bones giving out loud, cracking noises as she bent down to the floor. No sooner had her knees hit the floor than the sounds of the others, joining her in a kneeling position on the floor, including the man who aided the old woman through the dining hall and to our position at the top of the room. A room full of over 50 huge lichens all knelt before Heather and waited silently before her. People around the room had gasped in shock at this unexpected behavior. Heather spoke to the old woman, but I did not understand the words she had used, but my dad seemed to, and his eyes lit up as Heather spoke in the old tongue. Something I think I'm going to have to learn to speak.
Chapter 97. Heather POV. Welcome, old woman. We meet again, I said to the old woman in a soft, welcoming voice as I got up from my seat at the table and walked around it, heading casually to the old woman on the floor. She had yet to lift her head up, and I smiled to myself, thinking this woman might be the one. I had heard her speak softly to me when I was waking up in the other place, and if so, she was the reason I rushed back to the palace and took Mason as my mate. Though I recognized her scent, there was another woman in the room at the time, so until I hear her voice, I'm not completely sure it was her. As I stood beside her, looking down at her submissive position, I placed my hand on her shoulder, and sent a warm, healing warmth to her old body. The sounds of her creaking bones worried me a little, and as I am a healer, I saw no reason not to heal the old woman for what ailed her. The glow of the soft green light left my hands and engulfed her body, and many of the palace people gasped in surprise. No one had seen me heal before. It was always kept quiet, or I would have been overwhelmed by people wanting healing. But all the lichens had remained kneeling on the ground, low and deep. Some had their heads resting on the floor. They would not move without the old woman saying so. Or I could. I'm not sure yet. But as yet, I'm not letting them up. They could stay a little longer kneeling on the hard floor, for daring to come and kidnap me in the first place. I felt no rush to let them up. Stand, old woman. You are too old to be kneeling before me. I changed to speak in the common tongue, so the room could understand what I was saying. I knew that King and Queen could understand what I was saying earlier. Even my mother would have, as she read the same books I had. When I took them from the library to learn the tongue, that we would often talk to each other in that language, when we did not want others to know what we were talking about. I offered the old woman my hand, and she lifted her head to look into my eyes, and gently placed her hand in mine. I assisted carefully and helped her to her feet, and led her around the table. Zoran's guards all moved back as I came around the table, and sat her in the chair I had vacated. The man who aided the old woman had his head on the ground, and waited like the rest of the lichens for some sign or word to allow them up off the floor. "Old woman, what is your name?" I asked, as she had yet to speak, and I could not stop the smile on my face as she looked at me. "My name is Leone, my queen, and thank you for the healing. My old bones have never felt so good," she replied softly, a voice I remembered from the lichen palace, and it confirmed I was right. When I saw her enter the hall, her scent I immediately recognized from the bedroom, as I had not yet opened my eyes at the time. I was not 100% sure it was the woman's voice that I had heard, as there was another woman's voice who was not so nice, and I was worried I was giving the wrong person the niceties. "Would you like to join us at the table? We are nearly finished our meal. Your members may partake too," I offered. The king and queen had not said a word. Having sat back down and waiting for something, I'm not sure what, I could hear their thoughts. They were worried about what all of this meant, and were confused. I was being called the queen. I blocked out everyone's thoughts, as it was becoming rather busy. Everyone was having their own opinion. I decided to move forward. I would listen only to someone's thoughts if I felt the need, or if I felt threatened, or if I did not trust them enough, not to hear what they were thinking. And right now, I did not feel the need to read anyone's thoughts. "Would the king and queen of this palace mind if your people got up from the floor and joined the meal?" Although she addressed the question to me, it was for Zoran to answer. I looked over at him and smiled. He gave a nod of acceptance, and I felt like this might be a new beginning for all. "Rise, lichen, and pledge and greet your new queen, then take an empty seat and enjoy breaking meat with your queen," the old woman, Leone, called out to the lichens on the floor, and they all stood as one, placing their hands over their hearts and pledging their lives to me. I nodded to them, and I felt this sort of pressure of being released. And now the pressure was gone. The pressure would have stayed on the lichens until they had all pledged to me. This was not my doing or the old woman's. Just what happens when a new king or queen is in place. Leone gave a sigh when the pressure on her was gone. The released lichens also gave a collective sigh and moved around to find a place to sit. Not all ate, but sat quietly and looked around the room. Some sat and stared at me and Mason with looks of confusion and worry. The mixed looks told me not all wanted to come and pay their respects, and I made notes of the ones who had a sour look on their faces. Whether it was because they were seated amongst all these wolves that smelt of fear, or because they were here in the first place. I wasn't sure. But I would not trust a single one until they prove loyalty to me and Mason. And I won't go listening to their thoughts. I feel like that's an intrusion. I certainly would not like them doing it to me, but if what Brenda said is true, they can't hear what I am thinking. But I blocked my mind anyway, just to be on the safe side. Mason shifted in his chair, and I turned to look at him. He was staring out across the room. I followed to where he was looking and smiled at him. He did not like the large lichen that was staring at me. I guess Mason doesn't like the thought of competition. Sweetheart, we're mated. None of these lichens hold a candle to you. Plus, you're his boss now. I giggled at Mason. Boss? What do you mean? Mason sounded very confused. Had he not listened to what that woman called me? Did you not hear the pledge from the lichens? I asked softly in his head. He broke the stare he had with the lichen and looked at me. His brow furrowed, the glazed look as he tried to enter my head. But I refused to allow him in. Too much was going on in this hall for me to open my mind to anyone. The pledge, it was for you, he answered softly. You're my mate, so that makes you king, I said. Mason's face changed to one of surprise. He had not taken in that little bit of information. It seemed he was happy for me to be queen, but not him being a king. How weird. Did he think he would be something else?
Mason, POV. When the old woman joined us at the table, I was a little surprised the rest of the lichens had not stood up. They stayed where they were, and I could feel some sort of pressure in the room, as if they could not stand up unless that pressure was removed. I wondered who was putting that pressure on them. I looked over at Heather and wondered if it was from her or the old woman beside her. Not wanting to interrupt whatever Heather was doing with this woman, I would wait and question her later. The old woman seemed content to sit by Heather and chat like two old friends, in a language I did not understand, but it seemed Dad and her mum were fluent in it. I glanced about the room, looking at those lichens that had arrived, and wondered what they were doing here really. They were all here because of Heather being the new queen. How did that even happen? I was confused by all of this. I noticed our guards had been excused and had left the room to go about their duties. Does this mean I am not going to be a beta now? The lichens around the room talked either with their other lichen mates or not at all. They did not look like they were enjoying being here. The noise in the room was dull. Not many of our people wanted to talk either, but Heather and this woman were having a great chat, and so was her mother. She seemed to be full of endless questions, and the old woman appeared to be content with answering them. Heather reached under the table and grabbed my hand, having moved to sit beside me again, and her mother moved too, so the old woman was between the two of them.
Would you like to know what we are talking about?
Heather asked me in my mind, and I nearly jumped out of my skin at her voice entering mine. It is now like a normal mind link between us. I'm not sure if there are even words to describe it. She is in my head a lot like the wolf is in my head, but I can feel my wolf inside of me. I cannot feel Heather. She is just there. Yes, was my brief reply. Then a warmth covered my body, like someone had just poured warm water over me, and I could suddenly understand the words they were speaking. Neat trick. I chuckled at Heather. She shrugged her shoulders as if it was nothing, and never took her eyes off the old woman and her mother. The three of them were talking about Brenda, the woman I met in my dream, and I was a little surprised to know that it was the lost princess. But then I should not have been that shocked. This was confusing. I was not sure how I should have known that. To me, it was just a dream. But listening to these women talk about this lost princess and what they had managed to work out about her, this very old woman was her mother. That made this woman just over 4,000 years old. No wonder her bones cracked and creaked when she knelt before Heather. Today was one shock after another, The discussion had shifted to the palace where the lichens lived and how soon we would be moving there. I looked at Heather to see how she was reacting to the talk of moving, and she seemed to be calm, as if it was expected. Poor Heather. She had just been ripped away from her home to come live here, and now she is being removed from here too. Wait, that means I am moving too. Do I get a say in this? I want to be a beta. I have trained to be a beta. I don't want to be the king. Heather said something about a week or two before we would move to the palace so soon. I should have been listening to their conversation instead of feeling sorry for myself. That was why Heather did it, so I could understand what they were saying, and I ignored them completely. Now who looks stupid? Dad said he was going to get a lot of changes made, with how easily these lichens just waltzed into the palace as if they owned it. He was livid by it all. We needed more notice of their pending arrival, but none of our preset warnings were set off. How did they pass by our alarm system? Dad agreed we needed to look into the security videos and make sure we did not have a traitor in our midst, but that did not make sense to me. Surely we would have noticed a larger-than-life person living here. They would stand out like I do, wouldn't they? My brother said he would look at the staff's movements, but I think we won't find anything. Just like when the body was thrown out of the vehicle, we did not see it coming till the body was thrown out and we all rushed out to see. Sabrina was showing signs of being uncomfortable, and I suddenly worried about her going into early labor. Heather must have felt my anxiety rise as she turned her head and looked at me with a questioning look. "Sabrina," I said, and she looked past me and watched for a few moments as Sabrina squirmed in her seat, with Harold holding her hand, trying to talk to her and calm her down. Heather got up from her chair and walked quickly to Sabrina at the same time as I stood up and followed her. Heather sent a wave of green light over Sabrina, and she gained some color in her cheeks. But Sabrina still looked a little off.
"Harold, it is time. Get her to the birthing room. I will follow shortly,"
Heather said, and Harold picked up Sabrina in the bridal style and rushed out the door, and I followed behind. I looked behind me as I left the room, and Heather was talking to the old woman before she and her mother took off in our direction. Leaving Dad and Mum to handle the lichens in our dining hall, my brother was about to become a father. I was not too worried over Dad and the lichens. I could hear Sabrina give out a cry in pain and saw the worried look in Harold's face. She was not due for another few weeks, and for a werewolf, that is too early. We only have 5 months gestation, so a few weeks is a very long time in pregnancy terms, and with the poisoning before, I worried about what effects it may have had on the baby.
Chapter 99. Heather, POV. Leonie filled me in with who Brenda was, and how it hurt her so much when Brenda went missing. And then she felt her die, and her world fell apart. But she felt that she had passed on her legacy. But when they could not find her over the years, with the improvement of technology, they found my grandmother, then lost her somehow. Then knew my mom existed, but not sure where she was. And that was why they had the professors snag the king for many years to look at the DNA. It was more than just finding lost people since the war, though that was a great idea. It was ultimately to find me. She said she knew when I put on the pendant. It linked me to her. And she knew I was going to be the next queen, and the hunt for me grew more urgent, as she felt if I mated with Mason before knowing about my lichen heritage, I could be in for a huge shock, and so would Mason. Leonie did not know about Brenda still being around. She thought she had transcended to where our kind went to, and was pleased that she taught me a few things, and warned me about treachery within the group. I told Leonie who Brenda said to make sure she had been taken away, and Leonie said she would deal with it, and would get a few things sorted before Mason and I came to live in the palace, and she would also have my suite refurnished in the colors of my choice. I noticed Mason was not paying attention, so I most likely would have to explain all of this to him later. Mom seemed very interested in all that was being discussed and was learning a lot about her own heritage. Even though she was not going to be queen, as they had not chosen her, she still had some hierarchy over the Lycans here in this room and at the palace. She was above every one of those seated in this dining hall. Leonie, the pressure on the people, did that start when Mason and Heather mated, or earlier? Mom asked, curious about why it was even the Lycans on the room. Yes, well, it was a low pressure at first. That was how we knew someone had been chosen to replace me at long last. But today, it grew to unbearable, and those in this room had insisted we come and pledge allegiance to their new queen, so the pressure would be lifted. Those who have not attended today will feel that pressure until they pledge to the queen, or they will die in the fight to not support you. That pendant Heather is wearing is what is giving off the pressure. It demands that the queen gets the respect she deserves, and that the pendant has a lot of things it can do. Like Heather may already know about the portals, only the queen can do that, since the queen is now linked with that pendant. And there'll be many more abilities which I am not going to indulge in the moment. We have been in some very difficult times without the wearer of that pendant. Leonie was trying to be mysterious, but just mentioning the pendant was enough for me to get an overload of information, and I had to tell the flood of information to cease for now. We would call for it another time, and the information stopped. It was brilliant that I had learned to control that. One thought plagued me, though. If Brenda was wearing the pendant when she disappeared, how come she was not the queen? Suddenly, Mason felt stressed. I looked over at him, wondering what was making him so worried. His one word sent a cold feeling running down my back. Leonie, this is very interesting, but I have a woman going into early labor. I need to leave. I got up without waiting for a reply and headed to the stairs to where Harold would be taking Sabrina. I paid no attention to the Lycans or anyone in the room. My mind was on Sabrina. I gave her some strength to help her through what needed to come. I was not sure if stopping the birth was the right thing to do, and the arrival of these uninvited guests may have triggered the early labor. As I reached the birthing room, I felt my mom behind me. I turned and saw Leonie was with her, and I looked at her with confusion. Please, let me help. I have been bringing new life in for 4,000 years. I might have some knowledge that could help. Leonie begged. I saw my mom nod her agreement to allow Leonie in. Okay, but if Sabrina says get out, you leave, I replied, unsure how Harold would feel about that. What could I do in that moment? We need all the help we can get. Birthing, even for a healer, can be tricky. It's not the same as healing a broken arm. You have two life forces in play, and sometimes the mother can push the healing onto the child to save its life, over her own, and then you end up losing both. Harold had laid Sabrina on the bed, holding her hand and brushing small kisses on it, unsure of what to do in the situation. No matter how much training you have, when it comes down to seeing your mate in pain, all that learning goes out the window, and the need to protect takes over. Harold, we would like Leonie to stay and assist Sabrina. Are you guys okay with that? I asked, softly, as I reached the bed and started to assess how the baby was doing. Sabrina said yes. At the same time, Harold said no. Good. Harold, you need to leave. We can't have you in the room. I spoke as gently as I could, but with authority, making it hard for Harold to fight me about this. It was common. The man wants to stay, but can often be a hindrance rather than a help. As much as Harold wanted to argue, Sabrina urged him to leave. His face was sad and worried, but he complied, reluctantly, with her wishes. Now, young lady, when did you start labor? Leonie asked as she took a hold of Sabrina's hand and Mom went to the other side of her, each holding her hand. I stood at her feet, while a nurse rushed about getting the things that would be needed to set up at her feet. The incubator was turned on, and it was getting ready for the small child to arrive. "Yesterday," Sabrina answered, and I looked at her with shock. She had been going through this all day and had not said a word? But then I had been rather busy myself. But not even a word at dinner? How did I miss this? "The baby is doing fine, no sign of stress. Could you be more further along than you first thought?" Leonie was calm, and I could feel her sending warmth. And Mom was working on the baby. Together, they could both be kept alive. I could be. I was surprised when the doctor said how far along I was. It was at least 2 weeks less than I calculated. But who am I to argue with the doctor? Sabrina sucked in a breath when the next wave of pain went through her. I managed to put a block on her, so Harold would not feel her pain and stress, and it would not stress him out any further than he already was. Together, the three of us worked on bringing a new life into the world. Another 2 hours, the sounds of a healthy baby boy arrived, with a very healthy set of lungs. Sabrina cleaned up, and Harold was allowed back in. There seemed to be no residue to be an issue with the poisoning, and the three of us left Harold with his new son and headed back to the dining hall to announce the news. The hall was full of tension. The Lycans were grouped together at one side of the room, and our people were on the other, both staring daggers at each other. Goddess, what happened when we were gone?
Mason POV. When Harold came out of the birthing room, he was so distraught. Like all males, he wanted to stay with his mate and try and soothe the pain. But the higher the hierarchy of the males or females, the harder it is for those trying to aid the woman. So more often than not, the male is kicked out, and we are then left to try and help the distraught father through the waiting game, whilst he can feel his mate is in great pain and has to fight the urge to rush back into there and hurt everyone who is hurting his mate. But the only one hurting his mate was his pup, trying to come out. "She did not want me in there with her," Harold growled out in frustration and pain, not coping with the rejection from his mate, and we understood. He did not mean to be so angry, but there was little he could do. Men in the birthing room would just not work, and he would come around. When he gets it in his head straight and understand he was not rejected, just too hard to get things done when he growls and barks at anyone who gets close to his mate, who is in great pain, and I have to tread lightly in case I trigger his rage by accident. He would be on tenterhooks at the moment, and the slightest thing could set him off. I led him back to the dining hall, and to where Dad and Mum were waiting, and wondered why the room seemed to be full of tension. What happened in less than 10 minutes? Setting Harold down in a seat next to Dad, thinking he would be the best one to keep him calm, I looked around the room again and felt that the tension in the room had nothing to do with Sabrina going into early labor. "What is going on, Dad?" I asked, using our mind link, shocked I still had it, thinking I would lose our links once we changed packs, and becoming a Lycan was more than just changing packs. It was a whole body and mind change, and I was still getting used to being nearly 2 feet taller and my voice so much deeper. I hardly recognized myself now, or Heather for that matter. She was sexier now.
4 of the Lycans had found their mates in our women, and they seemed to be in an argument about taking them as their mates. The women didn't seem to mind, but the girl's family was against it, and this had brought a division among the people.
Mum answered in her calm tone, not a least bit shocked by the commotion in the room, as if she had expected something like this to happen. I growled out loudly, making all those in the room fall to their knees from the power of my growl, including my own mum and dad. I had not meant to cause them to all submit. I have yet to get used to being such a large Lycan and apparently a king, like my dad is for the werewolves. Seeing people fall on their knees kinda shocked me, and then reminded me that I am more than I was before, and most likely not yet as powerful as I'm going to be, and I may need to be more mindful of my reactions to things, as I can cause some unexpected reactions. Well, unexpected to me, that is. Who are the ones who have found their mates? Come forward now, I demanded, and 4 large lichen males came forward, and 4 tiny werewolf ladies rushed forward too. The parents of the girls tried to come forward, but I raised my hand to stop them from coming forward, and this action had them scuttling back to their seats with their tails between their legs and a mixture of guilt and annoyance on their faces. Pair up. Let me see who is with whom, I growled softly, trying to keep my power out of my voice and not force them together. The lady now standing next to her mate. The size difference was huge. It reminded the difference between Heather and I before she changed me. If you mate with the woman beside you, will she grow larger like Heather and I have? Will she become a lichen? I asked, as I was not sure how this worked. I know what happened between Heather and I. It was magical and rare. But if a lichen finds his or her mate, do they change to lichen? Yes, she will become a lichen. Not as fast as you did with Heather, as you are king and queen, but it could take up to a week to make a total change, one of the men answered. Why take so long to make the complete change? Dad asked, as curious as I was, and forgot I was the one asking the questions. If they were to change as fast as our queen did, they would not survive. They need to adjust to each step and have the body cope with it all. We are there for every step, giving them love and support and strength. We need them to make it through with as little difficulty or pain as possible. And now we have our queen. She might grace our mates with healing and stow any pain they may incur. Can the lady die from the change? This was interesting. I really wanted to understand. If I had Heather here, she would have reminded me of all the information I had received, and these questions would have been answered. But I guess in some ways I needed to ask these questions out loud so the parents of the girls would understand too. Not that I knew that at the time, but having thought about it later, it would make sense. No, the change will not harm them. We would die with them if it was dangerous. No lichen would risk being mated, if at high risk of death. Ladies, do you wish to be mated to the lichen beside you? Do not be intimidated by those around you. I want the truth, I asked with authority, and I felt the shudder go around the room, and my power swept the room. It even surprised me. Yes, the voice said with little to no hesitation. Then I see no reason for that pairing not to happen. The 4 pairs turned to each other, and the men leaned down and picked up their mates and walked back to their seats, taking their mates with them. The parents of the girls watched in disappointment as their daughters willingly went with their mates, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The king had spoken, meaning me, and it felt good to give a good verdict. I do not believe in keeping fated mates apart or taking a mate unwillingly. There are a few things that I disagree on when it comes to mates, but forcing a mating or denying the two who want to be together are 2 areas I would never agree to. Mother may have done everything she could to help us find our mates, and I may not have agreed with how she went about it, but after having to work and change for the better for my mate, I would encourage any that is hesitant to bond with their fated to do as Heather had done, and make the mate work for it. I may not have liked it at the time as I went through it, but I think I have come out a better person, and my mate a happier one.